They called her probationary. That's all she was to them. A trainee, a placeholder, someone filling a seat until the real pilots arrived. But the day someone noticed the faded ink on her forearm, the whispers started. And within hours, one name would ripple across the entire base like a shockwave no one saw coming. If you agree that respect should be earned, not given, make sure to like and subscribe, because this is one story you'll remember long after it ends. The Redstone Air Base stretched across the desert like a fortress carved from steel and heat, every runway shimmering in the late afternoon sun. It was a place where reputations were made, where pilots became legends, where one wrong move could erase your name before anyone learned it. In Hangar 12, where the newest recruits reported for readiness checks, Lieutenant Avery Callahan, 28, stood by her locker, silent, deliberate, her helmet cradled carefully under one arm. She had transferred in less than a week ago, her records stamped probationary in bold red letters. And that single word had become her identity before she ever touched the sky. Around her, the room buzzed with quiet mockery disguised as casual banter. Captain Ryland Brooks, the loudest voice in the room and the kind of pilot who believed swagger was more important than discipline, leaned against the edge of a console, laughing softly with his wingmen. 30 hours, he said, holding up 3 fingers for emphasis. 30 recorded hours in a cockpit, and they dump her in our squadron. Guess they're checking boxes now. One of his buddies chuckled. Maybe she knows somebody high up. Bet she's one of those politicians' daughters playing soldier. Or maybe, Brooks smirked, she's here to make us look good when she flunks out in week 1. Avery didn't respond. She didn't even glance their way. Her movements were measured, sliding her gloves into her flight bag, checking the visor on her helmet, inspecting the oxygen tube connection by touch instead of sight. Every motion quiet, practiced, and deliberate. And maybe that was why they laughed harder. To them, silence meant weakness. In the corner of the room, a younger recruit, barely 22, watched her closely from behind his console. Cadet Ellis Tran had only been at Redstone for 3 months, but his older brother had once served in an elite classified squadron before being grounded permanently. Ellis wasn't laughing. He'd seen men like this before, the quiet ones who didn't bother with pride because they didn't need to. But still, even he didn't know. Not yet. The briefing bell chimed, signaling the start of pre-flight checks. Avery slipped into her suit, fastening the seals around her wrists and neck, her movements crisp, efficient, automatic. That's when it happened. As she reached to adjust her shoulder harness, the sleeve of her suit slid back just enough for the ink to show. It was faint, aged, the black slightly faded against pale skin, but it caught the light for a fraction of a second. A winged lightning bolt curling around 3 letters burned into the inside of her forearm. Ellis froze. He blinked once, leaned forward slightly, as if making sure his eyes weren't playing tricks on him. He'd seen drawings of it before, passed quietly among recruits who never knew if the stories were true. He'd seen it etched on grainy black and white photos that weren't supposed to exist. And yet there it was, right in front of him. State Route 01. Storm Rider 1. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to look away before anyone noticed his reaction, but it was too late. The moment hung in the air like static before lightning strikes. One of the other cadets caught his expression and smirked. What? You see a bug or something? Ellis hesitated, then shook his head quickly. Nothing. Just thought I saw, never mind. But it wasn't nothing. Not to him. And soon, not to anyone. By the time they reached the simulators, the whispers had already started. Storm Rider, someone muttered, half joking, half curious. What's that? Another asked. Old meth. Came the answer from a corporal in the back. Supposedly some classified strike team from 15 years ago. Ghost pilots. Most of them never came home. Brooks overheard and scoffed. You guys watch too many movies, he said loudly, throwing a glare toward Avery without hiding it. Trust me, rookies with 30 hours don't fly secret black ops missions. And anyone who says otherwise is just trying to make this sound cooler than it is. No one disagreed with him. At least not out loud. The squadron gathered in the simulation bay, its massive dome towering overhead like the ceiling of a planetarium, walls lined with panoramic projection screens waiting to come alive. Each pilot stepped into their assigned pod, syncing up comms as the AI-driven battlefield loaded. Today's drill: hostile engagement over enemy airspace, 7 versus 7 dogfight. Rules simple, survive, or eject. Brooks smirked at her across the room, tapping his helmet as he passed her pod. "Try not to crash, rookie," he said under his breath. "Wouldn't want your first obituary to be during a sim." Avery said nothing, only lowered her visor, locked her harness, and waited for the countdown. Inside her pod, the lights dimmed until all she saw was the horizon. For the first time that day, her breathing slowed, her heart steadied, and the faintest glimmer of something unspoken touched her expression. Her hands rested lightly on the controls, fingertips poised, every sense locked in. 5 seconds. 4. 3. Brooks's laughter still carried faintly over the open comms. 2. 1. The field exploded into chaos, missile locks, radar pings, and shouts over the channel. Within 30 seconds, Brooks's team boxed her squad in, forcing them into a dead-end pattern they couldn't break. "Rookie's about to fold," Brooks crowed, locking onto her fighter's signal. "Told you this would be short." And then Avery's voice cut across the channel, low, calm, absolute. "Delta formation. Dropped 75 feet. Now." Her squad hesitated. Every other trainee following Brooks's lead, every muscle trained to doubt her. But there was something in her tone they couldn't ignore. Reluctantly, they obeyed. In a single, seamless motion, Avery yanked her fighter into a spiral dive, flipping her vector into a razor-sharp undercut that shouldn't have been possible in this simulation. The AI threw warnings, red lights blinked across panels, but she didn't flinch, didn't slow, didn't break. The maneuver sliced Brooks's formation wide open, flipping the entire exercise in 8 breathtaking seconds. By the 4th minute, her squad had wiped out the opposition, and the comms went silent. Outside the pods, the instructors exchanged uncertain glances. Colonel Adrian Shaw, head of Redstone's tactical operations, leaned slowly forward in his chair, his knuckles white against the edge of the console. When he spoke, his voice carried no louder than a whisper, but it cut through the air like a blade. "Callahan." One of the operators nodded slowly, scanning the list on his datapad. "Lieutenant Avery Callahan. Transfer from Raven Rock." Shaw's gaze flicked to the projected leaderboard, where her call sign had locked in at the top, one designation next to her name. The same 3 faded letters he hadn't seen in a decade. His jaw tightened. "Storm Rider 1. He murmured, almost to himself. The operator froze. "Sir, get me the ready room," Shaw said sharply, already standing. "Now." And just like that, the room shifted. The smirks were gone. The laughter faded. And somewhere deep inside the walls of Redstone Air Base, a name thought long buried had just resurfaced, carried not by rumor, not by legend, but by the quiet, unshaken hands of a so-called probationary pilot. No one in that hangar knew it yet, but the sky was about to remember her name. The ready room was quieter than usual. The kind of quiet where voices die in throats, where unasked questions buzz louder than laughter ever could. The recruits sat scattered across benches, heads bent over tablets and helmets, but everyone's attention orbited around one person. Lieutenant Avery Callahan. She stood off to the side, helmet tucked beneath her arm, her face unreadable. There was no victory grin, no hint of satisfaction in her eyes, only the same calm, controlled composure she had carried into the simulation. Across the room, Captain Ryland Brooks paced like a caged animal, boots striking the polished floor louder than necessary. He'd lost before. Everyone had. But never like this. Never to someone who wasn't supposed to matter. He muttered something under his breath, too low to catch, then slammed his flight tablet onto the console harder than protocol allowed. Lucky break. He spat finally, loud enough for everyone to hear. That's all it was. A glitch in the sim. No one replied. Not because they agreed, but because they didn't dare. From the far corner, Cadet Ellis Tran sat rigid, still trying to quiet the pounding in his chest. He'd been right. That tattoo wasn't decoration. It wasn't random. It was real. And if it was real, Storm Rider. He whispered under his breath, testing the weight of the name. Before anyone could ask what he meant, the heavy steel doors at the end of the room hissed open. The sound sliced through the tense silence like a blade. Colonel Adrian Shaw stepped inside. Shaw was the kind of man whose presence rearranged a room without a word. Tall, broad-shouldered, and deliberate in every movement. His uniform bore 4 rows of ribbons that spoke louder than introductions ever could. He didn't walk so much as command space, his boots striking the floor with measured precision. Every pilot straightened instinctively. Even Brooks froze mid-step. Shaw's gaze swept the room once, sharp and assessing, before locking onto Avery. He crossed the distance between them slowly, each step deliberate, the silence heavy with anticipation. Then, without warning, he stopped 3 feet in front of her, heels clicking together, and delivered a salute so crisp it echoed. The room collectively inhaled. Avery blinked, hesitated a half-second, and returned the gesture. Precise, practiced, perfect. Brooks stared, jaw slack. "Sir," he started, but Shaw raised a hand and cut him off without looking away from Avery. "You flew that maneuver," Shaw said, voice low but carrying across the room. "Inverted, spiral dive, vector flip at 35 degrees. Where'd you learn it?" Avery's eyes held his steadily. "Raven Rock," she said softly. The name hung in the air like a warning. Brooks frowned. "Raven Rock? That's classified." Shaw interrupted sharply, turning toward him for the first time, his voice clipped, measured, final. "You'll find no public records. And you don't need them." He faced Avery again, his gaze falling briefly to the faint ink peeking from beneath her sleeve. He didn't need to see the whole thing. He already knew. "Storm Rider," he said quietly. A ripple of whispers stirred the room, restrained but impossible to contain. Brooks looked from one face to another, frustrated, confused. "What the hell is Storm Rider?" "Some kind of drone program." This time Shaw turned fully toward the squadron, his voice steady but sharp enough to cut steel. "Storm Rider wasn't a program," he said, his words deliberate, measured. "It was a classified strike unit. 7 pilots. Handpicked. Missions no one talks about. Missions that stopped wars before they started. 5 didn't make it home. 2 disappeared." His gaze drifted back to Avery. 1 survived. Silence swallowed the room whole. Brooks' throat worked as he tried to form words, but nothing came. The air was heavier now, every breath weighted by the realization sinking in. Ellis finally found his voice, soft but audible. "She's Storm Rider 1. Shaw didn't confirm it. He didn't have to. Avery lowered her visor, sliding her gloves into her belt, her expression unchanged. "I didn't come here for recognition," she said quietly. "And I didn't come here to prove anything." Her voice wasn't sharp, wasn't angry, wasn't proud, but it carried through the room with more weight than Brooks' shouting ever had. "I came here to make sure none of you end up on the wrong side of a report they'll never let your families read." Shaw nodded once, as if to confirm her words, then turned to the room at large. "Training protocols change effective immediately," he announced. "When Lieutenant Callahan speaks, you listen. That's not a suggestion. That's survival." He pivoted sharply and strode out without another word, the door hissing closed behind him. The silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It wasn't pity. It was something heavier. Something none of them had earned, but all of them now felt. Brooks didn't speak again. Across the room, Ellis watched Avery slide her helmet into her locker, her movements as calm and steady as ever, like nothing had changed. But everything had. That day, Redstone stopped calling her probationary. Because by the end of the week, one name, whispered, reverent, undeniable, would ripple through every corner of the base. Storm Rider. And for the first time, they understood what it meant. The sun was setting over Redstone Air Base, painting the runway in streaks of gold and fire. But inside Hangar 4, the air was colder than the steel beams holding it together. The entire squadron had been ordered to assemble. No exceptions, no delays, no excuses. Rows of pilots, recruits, and technicians stood shoulder to shoulder in perfect formation. Helmets tucked beneath arms, spines straight, boots aligned. No one spoke. No one dared. At the front of the hangar, a podium stood beneath the towering U.S. flag. Behind it, Colonel Adrian Shaw waited, hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. To his right stood the base commander and 2 high-ranking officials in full dress uniform. Their presence a silent confirmation that this wasn't just a squadron briefing. This was a reckoning. And at the center of it stood Lieutenant Avery Callahan. Quiet, calm, composed, the same as she had been every day since arriving. Except today, there were no whispers about probationary pilots. No muffled jokes. No smirks. Because now they knew. Colonel Shaw stepped forward, his boots striking the steel platform with deliberate weight. When he spoke, His voice carried like a blade slicing through silence. "Storm Rider," he said, letting the name settle over the crowd like a shadow. "Most of you don't know what that means. You weren't supposed to. That's by design." A ripple of tension passed through the ranks. Shaw continued, his voice lower now, but sharper, as though each word carried the weight of ghosts. 15 years ago, there were missions you'll never read about. Missions so far off the books that most people at the Pentagon didn't know they existed. One wrong move, and wars would have started before anyone had time to argue about them. That's what Storm Rider Squadron was built for. 7 pilots, handpicked from across every branch. They didn't volunteer. They were chosen. Because they were the best. Because they were the ones you trusted when failure wasn't an option. He paused, scanning the room. His gaze was steady, but there was something in it. Something that said this wasn't just ceremony. It was remembrance. 5 of them didn't make it home. A quiet murmur rose, then died just as quickly. 2 disappeared. Shaw continued softly. Until one of them walked back into this hangar last week. He turned, extending his hand toward Avery. "She didn't tell you who she was. She didn't have to. But every one of you owes her the respect she earned before you ever set foot on this base. You sit in those cockpits today because people like her flew missions no one else would survive." The room stayed frozen. You could feel the weight of it pressing down, grounding even the most arrogant. Shaw stepped back, and the base commander moved forward next. The ribbons on his chest caught the overhead lights as he faced the crowd. "When the Pentagon called me 3 nights ago," he said, his voice calm but heavy, "I thought it was a mistake. I thought they'd mixed up records. I didn't believe the file until I saw it myself." He turned to Avery, holding a sealed folder, thick with stamped pages and signatures. "This contains everything the public isn't allowed to know about Storm Rider Squadron. But one thing isn't classified. You saved lives, more than we'll ever be able to count." He extended the folder toward her. Avery didn't move at first, as if unsure whether to take it, but Shaw nodded once. Slowly, she accepted it, her expression unchanged, her grip steady. The silence was absolute now. And then it broke. From the back of the hangar, Captain Ryland Brooks stepped forward. The same Brooks who had mocked her from the day she arrived. His boots dragged slightly, his shoulders stiff, but his eyes, for the first time, held something unfamiliar. Not arrogance. Not defiance. Shame. He stopped a few feet from Avery, his jaw tight, the weight of the entire squadron's silence resting on his shoulders. Then, slowly, deliberately, he straightened his posture, raised his right hand, and delivered a crisp, perfect salute. For a moment, it hung there between them, a silent apology, a silent acknowledgement, and something deeper than words could carry. Avery hesitated, then returned it. And that's when it happened. One by one, pilots across the hangar followed. Gloves tucked under arms, back straight, hands rising in perfect synchrony. Dozens of salutes snapping into the still air like thunderclaps. There were no cheers, no claps, no shouts. Only silence and reverence. For the first time since arriving at Redstone, Avery Callahan stood at the center of the room. Not because she demanded it, not because she needed it, but because respect had finally caught up to truth. Colonel Shaw stepped forward one last time, his voice quieter now, but it carried with more force than before. "Lieutenant Callahan," he said, "this base owes you more than we can ever repay. And from this day forward, you are no longer probationary. Effective immediately, your call sign is reinstated." He looked out over the rows of standing pilots. "Storm Rider 1, he said firmly. "Welcome back." Avery didn't smile. She didn't bow. She simply nodded once, her hands still resting calmly at her sides. Later, after the hangar cleared and the last echoes of boots faded, Avery remained behind. She sat on the edge of a workbench, the folder still unopened in her hands. The ink on her forearm caught the light, the faded winged lightning bolt and 3 letters she'd tried to leave behind. She traced the edge of the tattoo lightly with her thumb, her expression unreadable, caught between memory and silence. For the first time since arriving, she allowed herself a single, quiet breath. Not relief. Resolve. Outside, the desert night was falling fast, the runway lights burning like stars across the tarmac. Somewhere in the distance, the low hum of engines preparing for training drills carried into the hangar. She stood, setting the unopened folder gently on the bench, and reached for her helmet. Tomorrow, she'd fly again. Not as a trainee, not as probationary, but as Storm Rider 1, the last of her kind, carrying ghosts no one else would ever know, and a name that Redstone would never forget again. Because sometimes respect isn't given, and it isn't asked for. Sometimes it's earned in silence.